My name is Eliana, and my earliest memory is not of laughter or warmth, but of fear and confusion. I was 6 years old when my world shattered. The house I grew up in was filled with shadows that had voices louder than thunder. My father was a man whose presence alone made the air heavy. Every step he took sent chills down my spine, because I knew it carried with it either rage or silence, so sharp it cut deeper than screams. My mother was the only light in that darkness. She held me close at night when the yelling downstairs rattled the windows. She sang softly to drown the echoes of my father's furies. To me, she was not just a mother, but a shield, fragile yet unyielding. But even shields break when struck too many times. I remember the night everything changed. My father came home drunk, his eyes blazing with something more frightening than anger. He cornered my mother in the kitchen, and though I was too young to understand all the words, I felt the venom in his voice. He told her she had to get rid of me, that I was nothing but a burden. He threatened her life if she disobeyed. My small body hid behind the hallway wall, my heart beating so loudly, I feared it would give me away. The next morning, my mother's hands trembled as she dressed me. She avoided my eyes as she braided my hair, and when I asked where we were going, she only whispered that everything would be fine. I believed her because she had never lied to me before. We walked through the streets until we reached a cold building with stone walls. She knelt in front of me, tears falling faster than her words. She kissed my forehead again and again, her hands gripping mine as if letting go would shatter her completely. Then she pushed me gently toward a woman at the doorway and told me to be brave. I screamed for her not to leave, my small arms stretching after her, but she turned and walked away, her body shaking with sobs. I never forgot that moment, the sound of my cries echoing in that hallway, the image of her back disappearing into the distance, the scent of her perfume lingering long after she was gone. At 6 years old, I was abandoned, not because she stopped loving me, but because fear chained her choices. From that day on, I promised myself one thing. I would never forgive my father for breaking my family apart. And one day, I would find my mother again. I did not know how or when, but the fire of that vow burned in my heart stronger than any fear. The days after my mother left me were a blur of cold faces and unfamiliar walls. I was placed in a shelter where dozens of other children lived, each carrying their own scars, though none were visible. I was too young to understand abandonment, but old enough to feel the ache of loss. Every night I pressed my face into the thin pillow and pretended it was my mother's lap. I whispered to myself that she would come back soon, that this was only temporary. But as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, hope began to wither. I quickly learned the world was unkind to children without families. Other kids teased me for crying too much, and the staff were too overwhelmed to notice. When my small heart broke a little more each day, the only thing that kept me standing was the image of my mother's eyes filled with tears. I replayed it endlessly, convincing myself that she had no choice. That love was still there, hidden beneath her silence. As I grew older, bitterness started to coil around my heart like vines. I blamed my father for everything. I imagined him laughing at my pain, satisfied that he had separated me from the only person who ever loved me. That hatred became my fuel. While others around me surrendered to despair, I promised myself that I would fight. If the world thought I was weak, I would prove them wrong. If my father believed he could erase me from my mother's life, I would carve my existence into something unforgettable. School became my battlefield. I studied harder than anyone else, not because I loved learning, but because knowledge was power. I dreamed of a future where I could stand tall, untouchable, and one day look my father in the eye without fear. At night, when the loneliness became unbearable, I clung to the vision of finding my mother again. I imagined embracing her, telling her I understood, and showing her the woman I had become, despite everything. Yet beneath my determination, there was a wound that refused to heal. No matter how strong I appeared, I was still the girl left at the doorstep, screaming for her mother. That memory haunted me, whispering doubts in the dark. Was I truly loved, or was I simply too easy to abandon? The question burned like a brand on my soul. And so I grew, torn between vengeance against the man who destroyed my childhood, and the desperate longing to reunite with the woman who had given me life. Each step forward carried both rage and hope, twin flames guiding me toward a destiny I could not yet see. By the time I turned 12, I had already learned to wear a mask. On the outside, I was calm and collected, a quiet girl who rarely complained. But inside, storms raged. The years without my mother carved emptiness in me that nothing seemed to fill. I told myself I did not need anyone. Yet every time I saw classmates being hugged by their mothers after school, a knife twisted deeper in my chest. The shelter often reminded us that we were fortunate to have a roof over our heads. But fortune did not erase loneliness. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the faint snores and cries of other children, and wonder if my mother was thinking of me. Did she miss me the way I missed her? Did she regret leaving me behind? One evening, I overheard two of the older girls talking. They whispered about how some parents never returned, how some children were simply unwanted. Their laughter was cruel, cutting into me like glass. That night, I cried until my throat burned. But as dawn broke, I made myself a new promise. I would not let their words define me. I would not be a forgotten child. At school, I began to push myself even harder. My teachers noticed my determination and sometimes praised me, but their words felt hollow. I was not studying for approval. I was building armor. With every book I read and every answer I mastered, I imagined myself rising above the ashes of my broken childhood. Still, anger never left me. My father's shadow hovered constantly over my thoughts. I pictured him standing tall, while my mother crumbled before him, and hatred boiled in my veins. I dreamed of the day I would confront him, the day he would see that the daughter he tried to erase had grown into someone he could never crush. But deep inside, another fire burned brighter than hate. It was hope, fragile, stubborn hope that one day I would find my mother again. I clung to the memory of her trembling hands, the way she kissed me before she left. No matter how much pain I endured, that moment convinced me she had loved me. She had not abandoned me out of choice, but out of fear. This belief became my anchor. Whenever the world tried to convince me I was nothing, I reminded myself of her tears. Those tears were proof that I mattered to someone, proof that I was worth fighting for. And so I vowed that one day, no matter how long it took, I would search for her. Teenage years were not kind to me. While others were discovering friendship, love, and laughter, I was discovering survival. By 15, I had already built walls so high that no one could climb them. Trust was a luxury I could not afford. Whenever someone tried to get close, I pushed them away, afraid they too would leave me just like my mother did. At school, I excelled in silence. My grades placed me at the top, but recognition felt empty when there was no one waiting at home to celebrate. On the rare occasions when parents attended school events, I stood among the crowd alone, clapping for myself, pretending I did not notice the curious glances of others. I had grown used to the taste of loneliness, but beneath that solitude, a spark of determination kept me alive. I began to plan for the future, a future where I would no longer be the abandoned child, but the woman who rewrote her destiny. I worked part-time cleaning shops after school, saving every coin, dreaming of the day I would leave the shelter and build a life with my own hands. The shelter workers often said I was strong, but they never saw the nights I cried into my pillow. They never heard the whispers of doubt, telling me that maybe I truly was unwanted. Still, every time despair threatened to swallow me, I thought of my mother's face that last day. Her eyes had been filled with pain, not rejection. That memory was my weapon against the darkness. When I turned 16, something inside me shifted. The anger toward my father became sharper, more focused. I no longer just hated him. I wanted him to see what he had created. He believed he could destroy me by forcing my mother to abandon me. But I would grow into someone powerful, someone impossible to ignore. Revenge was no longer just a thought. It became a vision. I began to write letters I would never send. Letters to my mother, telling her I missed her, telling her I forgave her, even though the wound still bled. Letters to my father, filled with words I was too young to speak out loud. Words promising that one day he would answer for what he had done. I did not know when that day would come, but I knew I was preparing for it with every step. And deep in my heart, I carried one unshakable dream, that when I finally reunited with my mother, I would no longer be the broken girl she left behind. I would be the woman she could be proud of. At 17, I finally left the shelter behind. I carried nothing but a small suitcase of donated clothes, a few saved coins, and the heavy weight of my memories. The world outside felt overwhelming, but freedom tasted sweeter than fear. I rented a tiny room above a bakery, its walls thin and damp, yet to me it was a palace because it was mine. I worked endless hours. In the mornings, I cleaned the bakery floors. In the afternoons, I served customers at a small cafe, and in the evenings I studied until my eyes ached. I was exhausted most days, but exhaustion was nothing compared to the emptiness of the past. Each day of work was a step toward the future I was building for myself. Yet even in my busiest hours, thoughts of my mother never left me. Sometimes when I walked home at night, I caught myself searching the faces of women on the street, hoping for a glimpse of her smile. I dreamed of walking into a shop and finding her there, waiting for me with open arms. The longing was so strong it hurt, but I never allowed it to weaken me. Instead, it drove me forward. My hatred for my father also grew with me. I imagined him living comfortably, oblivious to the scars he left on my soul. I wanted to confront him, to ask him why he destroyed my childhood, why he forced my mother to abandon me. But at the same time, I feared that facing him would only reopen wounds I had worked so hard to seal. One evening after work, as I sat at my small desk, I opened the letters I had written over the years, pages filled with ink-stained emotions, unsent words that carried both pain and hope. I realized then that these letters were not just messages to ghosts. They were pieces of me, pieces of the girl who had survived abandonment, loneliness, and rage. I made a decision that night. I would no longer wait for fate to reunite me with my mother. I would search for her. I did not care how long it would take or how many obstacles I would face. She was out there somewhere, and I owed it to myself to find her. With trembling hands, I began to plan. I saved more money, cut expenses wherever I could, and started asking questions in quiet corners of the city. People told me it was impossible, that finding someone after so many years was like chasing smoke. But I had lived through the impossible already. I had survived being abandoned at 6. Compared to that, nothing felt out of reach. The search for my mother began quietly, almost secretly. I started by visiting the neighborhood where I once lived as a child. The houses looked smaller than I remembered, but the shadows of the past lingered on every corner. I asked old neighbors if they remembered a woman with kind eyes who once lived there with a little girl. Some shook their heads, some turned away, and a few whispered fragments of memory that gave me small pieces of hope. One elderly woman remembered seeing my mother years ago, carrying bags of clothes late at night. She said my mother had moved away suddenly, as if running from something. My heart tightened, because I knew exactly what she had been running from. My father's threats were still alive, even in strangers' memories. I began collecting every clue I could find. Old addresses, rumors, names of distant relatives. Many doors were slammed in my face, but I refused to give up. Every rejection only fueled me more. I was not just searching for my mother. I was reclaiming the part of me that had been stolen when I was 6. But the journey was not easy. Money was scarce, and there were nights I went to bed hungry because I had spent my last coins on bus fares to chase another lead. Sometimes despair tried to break me, whispering that she might not want to be found, that maybe she had built a new life without me. Those thoughts tore at me, but I silenced them with the memory of her tears. A woman who cried as she left her daughter behind would never stop loving her. Meanwhile, my anger toward my father grew sharper. Each step of my search reminded me of the chains he had placed on my mother. I swore that one day I would face him, not as the helpless child he once scared, but as a woman who had risen above his cruelty. One night, exhausted from my search, I sat by the window of my tiny room and stared at the stars. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to speak to the sky as if my mother could hear me. I told her I was looking for her, that I still remembered her voice, that I forgave her. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of weakness. They were proof of my strength, proof that no matter how broken my past was, I still carried love inside me. The road was long and uncertain, but I knew one truth with absolute certainty. My story would not end in abandonment. It would end in reunion. The more I searched, the closer I felt to the truth. Yet the journey also awakened ghosts I had buried deep. One afternoon while walking back from work, I saw a man across the street, whose posture mirrored my father's. My chest tightened, my steps faltered, and for a moment I could not breathe. Memories flooded back, the shouting, the threats. The night my mother broke apart under his cruelty. The man was not him, but the fear reminded me that one day I would have to face him. That thought haunted me. I realized that my search for my mother could also draw me closer to the man who had destroyed my childhood. The idea both terrified and fueled me. I wanted to look him in the eyes and show him that his daughter had survived. I wanted him to see that no amount of fear could erase me. Weeks later, my efforts finally brought a breakthrough. A woman at a local records office, after much persuasion, gave me access to older public documents. My hands trembled as I flipped through the papers, scanning names and addresses until one caught my breath. It was my mother's name. She had lived in a small town 2 hours away from where I was. My heart pounded with both joy and dread. She was real, not just a ghost in my memories. But alongside hope came hesitation. What if she had moved again? What if she had remarried and built a new family without me? The thought of knocking on her door, only to see rejection in her eyes, nearly broke me. Yet I knew I had come too far to turn back. That night, I barely slept. I lay on my bed with the piece of paper clutched in my hand, staring at it as though it might vanish if I let go. I imagined our reunion again and again. Would she run into my arms? Would she apologize for the years we lost? Or would she stand frozen, unsure how to face the child she had left behind? In the silence of that night, I made another vow. Whatever happened, I would not leave without letting her know that I had survived, that her daughter had grown strong. Even if she could not accept me, I needed her to know that the bond between us had never truly died. The next morning, I packed a small bag, tightened my resolve, and boarded the bus toward the address I had discovered. My heart pounded with every mile, carrying me closer, not only to my mother, but also to the answers I had been chasing for more than a decade. The bus ride felt endless, though in truth it was only a few hours. Every bump in the road rattled my nerves. Every passing tree made me question whether I was ready. By the time I stepped off in the small town, my legs were shaking, not from the journey, but from the storm of emotions inside me. The address I held led me to a quiet street, lined with modest houses. My heart pounded louder with each step, as though trying to break free from my chest. When I finally stood before the house, my breath caught. It was small, with faded paint and a garden that seemed lovingly cared for. Something about it whispered of peace, the very peace I had been denied for so long. I wanted to rush forward, to knock on the door, but my feet felt glued to the ground. Doubts attacked me mercilessly. What if she did not live here anymore? What if she opened the door and turned me away? What if she had never wanted me at all? I clenched my fists and tried to silence the thoughts, reminding myself of her tears the day she left me. Tears did not lie. As I gathered the courage to move, a sudden voice behind me froze me in place. It was deep, harsh, and unmistakable. I turned slowly, and my worst fear materialized before my eyes. My father stood only a few feet away. His hair was grayer, his body heavier, but his eyes still carried the same venom I remembered from childhood. For a moment, time stopped. The child inside me wanted to run, to hide, but I refused to let fear rule me again. I straightened my back and forced myself to meet his gaze. His lips curled into a mocking smile, as if he were amused that after all these years, I had dared to return. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Old memories clawed at me. His threats, his rage. The night he forced my mother to abandon me. But I was no longer the trembling little girl, hiding behind walls. I was Eliana, the survivor. I told myself that this confrontation was inevitable. To find my mother, I would have to face the man who had stolen her from me. My fist trembled at my sides, not from fear, but from the fury of years, finally finding its target. In that moment, standing between the house that might hold my mother and the father, who had destroyed my childhood, I realized the truth. This was not just a search for reunion. It was also the moment of reckoning I had dreamed of for years. My father's shadow loomed over me as he stepped closer. His voice dripped with the same cruelty I remembered from childhood. He asked me why I had come back, why I had dared to return to the life he had erased me from. His words were sharp, meant to cut, but I stood my ground. I told him I was no longer the frightened child he abandoned. I told him that nothing he did could erase me from this world or from my mother's heart. My voice trembled at first, but with each word it grew stronger. For the first time in my life, I saw surprise flicker across his face. He had expected weakness, but he was facing strength. He tried to laugh, but the sound was empty. His power over me was gone, and he knew it. I reminded him of the night when he threatened my mother, when he forced her to make the most painful decision of her life. I told him that his cruelty had forged me into someone he could never break. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might strike me as he once did my mother. But then something unexpected happened. He turned his gaze away, unable to face the fire in mine. In that silence, I realized that I had won, not with fists or revenge, but with the strength he could never crush. I stepped past him, refusing to let his presence block the path I had come so far to walk. My heart pounded as I turned back to the house that might hold the woman I had been searching for all my life. With trembling hands, I knocked on the door. Seconds felt like hours until it opened. And there she was, my mother. Her hair was streaked with grey, her face marked with years of sorrow, but her eyes were the same eyes that once cried as she left me, the same eyes that had lived in my memory through every dark night. For a heartbeat, we both froze. Tears welled in her eyes as her lips parted. Unable to form words, my own voice broke as I whispered the only word that mattered. Mother. Her body shook as she reached for me, and when her arms finally wrapped around me, the years of pain melted into that single embrace. I felt her heart beating against mine, strong and desperate, as if trying to make up for every lost moment. Behind us, my father's shadow lingered, but it no longer mattered. In that embrace, I had already defeated him. The moment I held my mother in my arms, time seemed to stand still. All the years of loneliness, anger, and unanswered questions melted away in the warmth of her embrace. Her tears soaked my shoulder, and mine soaked hers, but neither of us let go. It was as if we feared that if we loosened our grip, fate would try to steal us apart once again. When she finally pulled back, her trembling hands cupped my face, as if to confirm I was real. Her voice cracked as she whispered my name, over and over, as though she had been practicing it in her heart all these years. I saw the regret in her eyes, but I also saw love so deep, it silenced every doubt I had carried. She led me inside, and we sat together at the small kitchen table. The house smelled of fresh herbs and flowers, a place of healing she had built for herself, after years of fear. Between sobs and broken sentences, she told me how my father's threats had cornered her, how she believed leaving me was the only way to protect me. She had lived with that guilt every single day. I took her hands and told her I understood. I told her that her tears on the day she left were what kept me alive, proof that I was loved even in absence. She wept harder, calling me her brave girl, her miracle, her reason for breathing again. For the first time, I felt whole. The hole in my chest that had ached since childhood began to close. My father could no longer haunt me. His cruelty had lost its power, for love had won. In the days that followed, my mother and I spent hours together, sharing stories, filling the years we had lost. We cooked meals side by side, laughed at small things, and sat in silence, simply holding hands, unwilling to let go. Every sunrise felt like a gift, every moment like a second chance. I realized then that revenge had never been about destroying my father. It had been about surviving long enough to find this moment, to reclaim the bond he had tried to sever. By building my strength, I had prepared myself for this reunion. By holding on to hope, I had given myself back to her. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. What defined me now was this love, this unshakable bond between a mother and her daughter, who had found each other again. And in that truth, I finally found peace. My story, once marked by abandonment, ended in reunion. And as my mother held me close, beneath the quiet light of evening, I knew that from now on, we would face life together, no longer broken, but whole.